Hey guys, welcome to today's video, and this is a battle report. So this is my first 8th edition game, and it's featuring my Necrons versus a friend of mine's Grey Knights. So let's spin through the army lists. So starting with the Grey Knight Strike Force then, featuring a Grand Master, a Brotherhood Champion, bunch of Terminators with an Apothecary, two standard Dreadnoughts, a Venerable Dreadnought, two Nemesis Dread Knights, and a Storm Raven gunship. So an awful lot of firepower and an awful lot of abilities to teleport around the battlefield, giving him much needed mobility. And here is this superbly painted Grey Knight army. Low on numbers, high on firepower, high on wound count, so going to be quite tricky. And then my Necrons. So we have an Overlord with a Resurrection Orb, on foot a Catacomb Command Barge, 10 Immortals, a total of 40 Warriors split into 10 and 2 15s, 9 Scarab bases, 6 Destroyers, 2 Annihilation Barges, and my aerial attack comes from a Doom Scythe. Slightly under the points from the Grey Knights and slightly lower than power level, but pretty evenly matched. And there is the army, so a nice blue and orange scheme with lots of weird glowy effects. So the battlefield then, so this is a Realm of Battle board. You might have seen that featured on my channel before. So this is the first time I've tried to do an overhead camera shot so you can see what's going on, and then there'll be some side camera action when I can squeeze it in. The way this is going to run, I'm going to fast forward through a lot of this. So it's going to be at 5 times speed of play, otherwise this video would be exceptionally long. And I'm doing a voiceover rather than a live commentary, because live commentary and audio makes quite a difficult edit, and we'll try and work out how to do that next time. So the battlefield then features a Space Wolf outpost in the middle of the battlefield, and the Necrons believe there's some fancy technology that might be of use to them in the middle of that, and the Grey Knights have been sent to interdict that force and deny the Necrons any shenanigans that are going on. So deployment then. So along the bottom of the battlefield are the Necrons. So I've heavily baited on the right hand side there, so there's the 30 warriors and a lord on foot in the bottom right with the Doom Scythe. Centre right is the barges and the destroyers, with the Catacomb Command Barge giving as much of its bubble as possible, and then a strung out line with a little few warriors on the left and the Scarabs, which are pretty fast, aiming to interdict on the Dread Knights. Along the top, just out of shot unfortunately, because I couldn't quite get the camera to reach everywhere, the 2 Dread Knights are sort of mid-top right, then the 3 regular Dreadnoughts, including the Venerable, are on the top left, with the Storm Raven loaded with the characters and a squad of Grey Knight Terminators. And that's pretty much it. And because the Grey Knights deployed first, they get to go first automatically. The blue 40mm bases represent the tactical objectives, so we're using that particular mission that features tactical objectives, and we've drawn 3 cards each, and we're pretty much ready to rock and roll. So here we go, we've got a side camera sweep across the battlefield so you can see the deployment here a little bit more in detail. I need to learn to move this camera a bit slower, it's a little bit quick to for the focus to work, so but you can see the battlefield a little bit more clear from this angle. You can see where everything is set up, and a quick spin from the Grey Knight's perspective as well, so you can see both sides of the battlefield. So the mission we're actually playing is the first Maelstrom of War one, the Cleanse and Capture, so that we can use the command points quite well, and we can use the strategic objectives nicely. And the deployment zone type was Frontline Assault, which I got to pick because I didn't get to deploy first. So you can see a slight pyramid kind of effect towards the centre of the battlefield as reflected in the Frontline Assault deployment. So let's talk basic Grey Knight strategy here. So having drawn the cards, he's heavily baited on his defend and secure the bottom left objective there. That's currently where my Necron warriors are. So his plan was to send the Storm Raven and his forces down that right hand flank, or my left hand flank as it was from this perspective, and in the meantime send his Dread Knights towards the middle of the battlefield, which was another one of his objectives that he's drawn on his cards. So my weakest flank being that left hand side, obviously a little bit of concern, as many of his big heavy hitters are going to come down that way. but also I need to be worried about those Dread Knights because they are super powerful. So that was the plan for the Grey Knights for turn 1. As this is where we now get onto a bit of fast forward action rather than watching us roll lots of dice and move models around. So hopefully this kind of makes sense as I talk through the battlefield and the game. So as we can see, the Dread Knights have moved up, the Dreadnoughts have moved up, the Storm Raven has moved up, and that is just super fast and loaded with guns, which I'm obviously quite concerned about. So he sent all his forces as far forward as he can, and now using the gate ability, he's now moving his Terminators around to come in from the rear lines here. So his aim here, making sure that he's 9 inches away as per the rules, decided that we couldn't quite squeeze the full 5 models in there, so he had to move backwards slightly, mainly because they're full of characters. If there was sort of 3 or 4 Terminators in there, we reckon we could have squeezed it in, but I got a bit lucky with that rear defensive line there. Now the Grey Knights know that if he destroys a full unit of Necrons with the reanimation protocol ability, they can't get back up, so his aim here was to take out that full little unit of 10 warriors on that left hand flank. So letting rip with an awful lot of guns is this is where I decided that I don't like Smite very much. Smite is a super powerful ability, basically rolling 5 up and you lose models, and being a Necron player, I don't have any ability to deny any psychic powers. So here we go, just making sure that everything's in order as he starts smiting, and I start knocking models over without even having to roll a dice in any kind of defence. Smite is so powerful. I can see Smite spam being mentioned on many Facebook and other forums about how powerful it is, and even with the Grey Knight version, which is a slightly lower version than a regular Smite, it's still knocking models over left, right and centre. So having run out of things to shoot my Necron warriors with, he's now switched targets to the Scarabs, knowing that they're pretty tasty against anything that's high toughness, as they always wound on a 5. Just leaving 2 warriors and hoping that morale will do the trick. So picking off some of these Scarabs, I think I lose 1 base and take 1 down to a wound, which isn't too bad. You know, they don't really have much of a save, they're pretty useless. But it did burn up a lot of weapons that cause single damage, and because they've got 3 wounds apiece, they were just absorbing a lot of this quite nicely. So quite happy with the minimum amount of damage that was thrown out here. This was fire coming from that centralised Dread Knight. Well, we thought we'd finish with the guns on those Necron warriors, but it turns out there was a couple more guns in range, and that was enough to take them down. But then I thought, you know what, there's a chance that there's only 1 save that I could make, so I used a command point here and re-rolled the save, thinking that if I can just keep 1 alive, that means reanimation protocols are going to kick in on the next turn. I could bring back some of these warriors. So using a command point there, I managed to keep 1 alive. However, this was our first mistake in the game, as we both then proceeded to forget about the morale phase. The morale phase, I lost 9 warriors in there, so I'd have needed a roll of a 1 to have kept them in the fight. But conversely, I also completely forgot that you can burn 2 command points, and I had a pool of 6 that I could have used just to have automatically passed it. So a couple of weird little scenarios there would have meant that I'd have lost a couple of command points later in the game. But one of those things where, in the heat of the battle, and this being our sort of first game of 8th edition, we knew we needed to do the morale phase, because that's what he was banking on a little bit earlier in the game, and then we completely skipped that entire phase when the end of the turn came. So a little bit annoying for the Grey Knight players, but one of those things that just happened in the heat of the battle, I guess. Anyway, moving on to the Necron plan of attack. So my tactical objective cards was that top right hand objective. Now I've got quite slow moving forces, so I plan to blob up those 30 warriors and a lord on the right hand flank and move that through the building, trying to get round to the back there. But knowing that really I wanted air superiority, and the only way to do that was to get rid of the Storm Raven, which still had a full complement of Terminators and characters in there. And the best unit on the board for me to do that are the Destroyers, because they do damage at D3 and they're -3 to your armour save. They kick out an awful lot of shots, so that was going to be the best plan. And also the command barges, fire those into that thing, try and take it down as best possible. In the meantime, using the Scarabs to try and hold up that centralised Dread Knight. They're hitting on 3s, they've got 40 attacks between that large blob there, always wounding on 5s. Okay, he's got a 2+ save, but attrition, and also the fact that when he falls back out of combat he won't be able to shoot, as he doesn't have any rules to stop it. So starting off, reanimation protocols, then I bring back 3 more warriors, sorry, to give that little unit its 4 back again. So here we go, moving the Scarab straight up. They've got a 10-inch move and they just steam straight forward. That 10-inch move is amazing. Really impressed with that. The Destroyers also have a 10-inch move. So it's a case of now getting those into position, maximising my range, and then moving those warriors up on the far right-hand side. Also want to put some Immortal Fire into that Dread Knight, trying to weaken it down. It does come with an awful lot of wounds and it's got a pretty good save, but those Gauss weapons on the Immortals do remove its save down by, I think it's -2, so it'll give me a chance to knock a few wounds off before sending the little Scarabs into combat. So just making sure I'm maximising my range here. 24-inch range pretty much across the board for Necrons. There's not much that's got a further range really. Just making sure I try and keep out of arm's reach from any kind of charges, because charging from Grey Knights into Necrons is probably not going to end well. So sitting out as maximum as possible, making sure my command barge has it's got a 12-inch bubble to add 1 to many of the dice rolls, so making sure that's sort of centralised. Plus after the FAQ it's now a character, so it makes it quite difficult for anyone to kind of target it, as it's under 10 wounds, and even though it's on a large little barge looking thing, it can't be picked out in combat, which is, well, from shooting, which is a good thing. So moving the scythe forward then, realising that this isn't 7th edition anymore, I don't have to worry about fire arcs anymore, I can shoot death rays and Teslas out of its backside. Also trying to soften up that Dread Knight with those weapons as well. Very scared of Dread Knights, they're not very nice things. They've got so many wounds and such a good save, and they can do all kinds of powerful attacks, so making sure that I try and at least reduce it and then tie it up in combat, or force him back so that he can't shoot the next turn. So we go then into the Necron shooting phase. Here we go, the Destroyers rocking out 12 shots to go, and with re-rolls on 1s for those guys, and then a +1 to hit from the command barge, making sure I try and pick on that Storm Raven as best possible. So just because he's -1 to hit, being a flyer, with those re-rolls of the 1s to try and get what I'm looking for is 3s really, because then the command barge makes those a 4, which then gives me the hits that I need on the Storm Raven. So it turns out that Destroyers are pretty good at wrecking Storm Ravens, taking it right down with a whole bucket of wounds going on here. And then we start off with the command barge, with the Annihilation barges as well. So by the end of all the shooting phase, I believe the Storm Raven was down to just a pitiful 2 wounds. So highly degraded on its stats. Here we go, down to 2 wounds, and just make that out on the dice there. What that left me with is those 4 warriors then. 4 warriors with their Gauss weapons. They're hitting on 4s as well, with a -1 on the armour save. And unfortunately the Grey Knights fouled pretty much most of his saves. There's a couple of issues that we decided, post game after this, realising about the morale phase, and that would have impacted this particular phase, as that Storm Raven may have survived. Equally though, if I'd burnt those command points as I mentioned earlier to make sure that they stayed in the fight, that result would have still stood, but I may have lost something a little bit later in the game. I can't remember exactly where I used all the command points now. I think there was a couple of other saves on Annihilation barges, so it may have swayed the result of this, which is why this is a learning game for us. This is our pretty much first game of 8th edition, and it's always one of those, hindsight is 20/20 vision. So we're definitely going to replay it with exactly the same armies in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll record that and make sure that I can try and spin that back up onto the channel and let you know how the rematch went. In the meantime, here we go, we're piling fire into the Dread Knight now, trying to give it some wound damage, and there we go, it started taking some damage from the Immortals, and here we go, this is the Teslas on the Doom Scythe, picking on it as well. Teslas, they do generate an awful lot of hits if you hit those 6s, because that adds another 2 hits to the pool, but obviously that's being their weapon. You know, they get the extra hits. They don't have any good AP, so lots of 2-up saves being made from the Dread Knight. We managed to pinch a couple of extra wounds off it, which is always a good start. And here we go, on to the charging phase now, with the Scarabs heading into the Dread Knight, with the Overwatch being done first. Very limited impact. And here we go, so the first 8th edition combat. Who would have thought that Necrons, being a kind of a shooty type army in the most case, was sending in for the main combat. As it turned out, I think this was pretty much the only melee in the entire game, as I kind of sort of pinched the Grey Knights, made them keep coming to me, and just kept shooting them. But this was the only combat going on. Now this was mistake number 3, I think now. So command barges can add 1 to the hit dice of any unit. I read that as any unit. I even looked in the rules about 6 times during this game about any unit, but kept overseeing the fact it was any 1 unit in a turn. So actually what I'd done here was I'd added to the hit rolls of the destroyers, and then in the combat phase added to the hit rolls of the Scarabs, which completely forgot as well that they're not actually infantry, so wouldn't have been affected by the barge at all. In fact, Scarabs can't take any buffs at all from any characters in the Necron army. So this was mistake number 3, but you know, this is, as I keep saying, this was a learning battle, and the rematch is definitely on. So I'll try not to keep repeating that, but yeah, the rematch is on. So moving on then into the Grey Knight turn 2. So they've lost the Storm Raven. The Terminators, I think, took 1 out from the rolling a 1 to die from a vehicle explosion. So the Dreadknights have made a move forward. The Dreadnoughts have made a move forward, and they're trying to move in. So they've taken that objective in the bottom left, and one of his objective cards was to hold it, or to take it first and then to hold it for 2 turns. So that was his plan in that bottom left hand corner. In the meantime, he's just trying to get into range and trying to smite me mostly, because that seems to be the most lethal weapon in the game at this stage, and I can't do anything about it. So I believe that was a smite attempt from the Dreadnought there, and actually perilled himself and took a mortal wound. So I think over this entire game, even with a couple of rerolls from his command points, I think the Grey Knights made 4 or maybe even 5 double 1s for perils tests on the smites or the gate ability to move around the battlefield. So yeah, took a couple of wounds on himself, but in the meantime, the Dreadnoughts are opening up on the command barge. I'm sorry, not the command barge, the Annihilation barge. That's taken a fair bit of damage. I think that's down to 2 wounds now. Fortunately, it has the living metal rule, and doesn't degrade on damage either. So as long as it's on at least a couple of wounds, it's still good to fight, and then we'll always start to generate wounds every turn. Lots of rules checking going on in the background as we're trying to learn the stats for the weapons, as so much has changed. I think a lot of the time we kept trying to check whether the auto cannons had an AP -1, which of course they do. There's a couple more going into the Immortals this time, but they're tough as old boots and making their saves. So that bottom left-hand blob of warriors, the 4 warriors have all been blown to pieces, so they can't reanimate, so the rest of the unit was removed there as well. And this time looks like we're trying to gate into the back corner of the battlefield here. Just double checking all our measurements and making sure that he was in, and everything was all above board. You can also see in that previous phase from the Grey Knights there, just before we move into the Necrons phase, is that one of the Dread Knights has done that gate ability down to the bottom centre of that, where the foliage are, where the trees are, which kind of threw my plans off my Necron warriors on the right hand side, as now I've obviously got to deal with this great big monstrosity behind all my forces. So there's going to have to be a bit of a spin around and adjustment of the tactics Bear in mind that what I need to do is get to that objective in the top right hand corner in front of the Doomscythe. But can't do that if there's guys messing around in your back lines in your base. So it's a case of having to spin around the Immortals here to try and get some shots on it, and then spin around some Warriors to try and get some shots down there as well, and trying to get as many into rapid fire range as possible, as a blob of 30 kicking out 60 shots, all with AP -1, and with a Lord in there as well for that +1 to hit. It's going to be pretty tasty. Those Dreadnoughts are super tough, so having to move the Immortals in to try and support that, and see if I can get some rapid fire ranges in there as well, and then get these Warriors back and try and get them into the into range. Just try and get as many shots in there as possible. It looks like that middle unit of the 15 didn't need to move to get the 12-inch rapid fire, so they were cool as they were. Try not to move them as far back as I needed to move them, just enough to keep them in range and make sure they can do the trick. So the Annihilation Barges then all want to pick on those Dreadnoughts that are moving up, because they're obviously going to be a concern, and those autocannons are pretty tasty as well. In the meantime, the Destroyers also want to start taking on some Terminators. Destroyers are really good at taking on multi-wound tough models. The AP -3 and D3 wounds, really good unit to try and take out things like Terminators. And while we do that, then the Doomscythe spins around, making sure that it can move its minimum distance without buggering off the field and dying, and then making sure my barge is offering as much support as possible. So lots of dice being rolled here as we try and take out the Dreadnought. That's plenty of damage done to him as well. He's not quite dead, but he's seriously reduced on his wound count. And in the meantime, the Destroyers start taking on some Terminators alongside the Doomscythe as well. So the Doomscythe Tesla weapon kept forgetting about the 6s to hit. It was really annoying. Plenty of little things to keep forgetting in this, that 6s to hit on a Tesla adds extra dice. So a couple of times we did roll the entire pool again if it hadn't made any difference to that particular part of the game. So I managed to kill off a couple of those over on the left hand side of the battlefield as we look at it. And this time we also managed to take out Dreadnought as well, so it was a combined weight of fire from a whole bunch of units. I mean, that's sort of 30 Warriors, 10 Immortals and a couple of other bits I think I was firing backwards there. Just managed to shred it eventually, just attrition. And even though I've got 2 up saves, reducing them down to 3s and 4s for saves is pretty good. And it's one of the big things that I really do like about this edition. Even though you might be super tough, those AP damage weapons are really good. The final piece of shooting then was trying to use the barges on that lead Dreadnought, which was a success, as Tesla is just amazing against that kind of thing. And then we moved into the melee combat that was still ongoing between the Scarabs and the Dreadnought. So the Dreadnought eventually fell to the weight of the Scarabs' feeder tendrils, which was a pretty sweet move really, tying that up and getting rid of that bad boy. So that was both Dreadnoughts now down. That was one of my objectives as well, was to take out models with more than 10 wounds, so that scored me a couple of points as well for the game. So we move back into the Grey Knights phase now. Lost lots of stuff now, so it's almost damage limitation at this stage. So sending my Scarabs up towards that as part of the consolidation, up towards that objective, as Scarabs can obviously take now, and then here come the Smite boys. So separating some of his characters slightly at the back there to give some cover around to his other models on the left. They've stayed where they were because they need to stay on that objective for 2 turns. In the meantime, the other Terminators come in and start smiting at my Doomscythe. Here we go, lots of psychic tests going off, lots of wounds being caused straight away, pretty painful. And the Dreadnoughts opening up on the Annihilation barges because they were annoying him, and they were generating wounds back, so I hadn't actually lost any at this stage. Made a couple of good saves though, which was great to see. I mean, I'm saving on a 5+ on auto cannons here, and eventually one goes down. I mean, that was the really weakened one, but It was kind of expected, that sheer weight of fire and then the crack missiles coming off of those guys as well. They eventually lost a barge. There we go, more smites coming in. There's a lot, and storm bolters coming in on Doomscythe as well. Took him down several wounds as well. Living metal again on those things, so he needed to really reduce it. Otherwise, I was going to spin back wounds and then sort of come back into full strength and full ballistic skill once again. But yeah, Smite, can't do anything against Smite with Necrons, but that's all part of the fun. There we go, let's move into Necrons turn 3 then. So no reanimation protocols to worry about, it's just the odd regen of wounds going on. And one of my objectives is now in that top right hand building that we can see the warriors moving towards. So I definitely need to get those up over there. It's going to be almost uncontested at this stage. Even with the gate ability, it's the sheer weight of numbers now should hold that against any other Grey Knight model. Also, I want to push towards that objective where the scarabs are as well, because I need to hold that for 2 turns to get the point for that. So not only is it securing it, you've got to hold it. That was one of the cards I've got. In the meantime, now it's destroyers against terminators and annihilation barges against dreadnoughts, and that's pretty much how the rest of the game is going to play out. So making sure that my Doomscythe can still move around quite happily, just checking that his next 90-degree turn is not going to take him off the board with his minimum move. And then we start moving the Immortals back, having killed the Dread Knight. They can now come back in and start picking on Terminators. Just checking the bubble from the command barge again. I think there was a couple more times here where I completely forgot that it's only 1 unit, so there was a couple of times here where I was, I think I was buffing the Destroyers and the Immortals. Again, I do apologise to my good friend, but I think we both read the rule and we both missed it, and yeah. But next time we won't get it wrong, and next time it will be a very different result, I am sure. So let's see how good Destroyers are against Terminators. Let's roll a bucket of dice, and then, yep, that's 3 straight down. They are super powerful. And then the Immortals coming in. In fact, the command barge is actually firing his little Tesla gun that he's got under there. That ripped off a wound as well. And then Doomscythe, I believe, was then firing lasers out of his arse and killing off a couple more of those Terminators. Judging by the dice there, looks like we're going with the Annihilation barge next into the Dreadnoughts. Buckets of save, and that's the Venerable one, so he's getting some re-rolls here, or he's going to get an invulnerable save against some of the shooting damage there, but it still takes a whole bucket of wounds. And that pretty much ended that turn, so we've taken out a whole squad of Terminators and wounded that Venerable Dreadnought, and that was where turn 3 ended. So moving to the Grey Knight's turn 4 then, so he's trying to secure that objective down in that bottom left and try and keep away from me, and also try and take out my Doomscythe for the giggles. So he's moved a couple of characters in to try and do that on the Doomscythe with all their smite abilities. In the meantime, he's then said, you know what, I've secured this objective long enough, I've got my points, I'm going to gate over and try and deny you yours over here on the top right hand corner. So making sure he's 9 inches away, he just simply picked them up, moved them over. I think it's a 6, I think he needs on a psychic test. Again, I can't deny anything, I can't do anything about it. It really makes the Grey Knights super manoeuvrable. Now they can only do the gate ability, or attempt the gate ability, once in any game turn. Now if you're playing a friendly or narrative, they can do it with multiple units at any time. It's only in the match play scenario that we're playing here that you can do that every single turn, but only once 1 unit. Which is a little bit limiting, but it's certainly more manoeuvrable than they've ever had before. It's a great ability to get you around the battlefield with your super elite army. And one of the big things they did suffer from before was that manoeuvrability. So the Dreadnoughts then are still trying to pick on my command barge. And I now also am aware that one of my command cards, one of my tactical objectives, is to shift everything off of that centralised objective. So he has to be no more than 6 inches for 1 victory point, and no more than 12 for a D3 victory point scenario. So fully aware that what I need to do is rip those 2 dreadnoughts apart in the next turn, otherwise to get those D3 points. So we move into the Necrons turn 4 then, knowing that those are my new objectives. Cards have got to secure that middle of the battlefield as well as that top right objective still. So to get to that top right objective, I've got all those warriors in the world. I've got 30 warriors over there with a lord. That lord's given them an extra 1-inch movement as well, because it's +1 to advance, and as well as the +1s to hit. And there is a lord over there doing that ability for me, and that puts me all in nice range of those terminators that are up in that top right hand corner. Meantime, the scythe can bugger off and do a 90-degree turn right, and then get in behind the dreadnoughts. And what I want to do now is obviously pick off these characters. So I've got immortals to do the job, I've got destroyers to do the job, but I've also got destroyers to worry about those dreadnoughts as well. If I want those D3 victory points for the centre objective. So I gamble here. I think I go with a bit of split fire, just to try the split fire rule and fire a couple of destroyers towards the venerable dreadnought, and then the rest of the destroyers over towards one of the characters on the left hand side. Didn't work out as expected, but it was just one of those things where, you know what, we can actually split fire now, and thought I'd give that rule a go and see if anything worked out here. So not all the full dice going towards those models, it's just working out where I was going here. So the Immortal's opening up, trying to kill the Grandmaster. Grandmaster losing wounds left, right and centre, which is those AP -2 I think for the Gauss blasters on the Immortals. Super powerful guns. Then the results of the split fire not quite going to plan. Still got a few more guns going off at that Warlord there, the Grand Master. He's only down to, I think he's got 1 wound left, so I'm forcing him to make as many saves as possible. Causing lots of wounds going on here, forcing those saves, and eventually that's it. He loses his last wound and he's gone. That's Slay the Warlord as well. So we're closing in on the end of the game here. So the Grey Knights have got nothing more to lose really now, so he's going to throw his characters into cover to try and keep them safe. In the meantime, his Venerable Dreadnought, who is severely weakened, going to chance his arm with a charge into the Immortals. Overwatch doing very little, and yep, the Dreadnought gets into combat. And getting into combat with Immortals, which aren't particularly great in combat, he starts smushing them and knocking them all down, which was kind of expected, and they failed to do anything in retaliation to him, just failing to wound and failing to do pretty much anything in combat. But obviously I've still got reanimation protocols to worry about on the start of my next turn, so not overly concerned that they've been knocked over. You know, that's just kind of expected thing. But Dreadnoughts, when they fall back out of combat, if he chooses to do so, then can't shoot, so not too big a sacrifice. So I still haven't managed to take this central objective yet, so it's a case of now moving all these warriors up and getting them in to deal with the 2 dreadnoughts that are remaining, that are stopping me getting those D3 points. So slinging those forward, trying to get as many as into rapid fire as possible as I can possibly stretch. A whole bunch, I think there was about 50-50 there that were within 12 inches, as you can see from the tile size. He's about central, and I've got sort of the front line are within 12 and the others aren't. So just a case of getting the others now into 24-inch range where possible, making sure my Lord is fairly safe in the middle. He's fairly safe sat there being a character. and then just lining up the barge and the Catacomb command barge and then the destroyers to try and pick on that one. And here we go, we're falling back out of combat. So reanimation protocols, I think one of them got back up, and then we just fell back out of combat, so they can't do anything this turn now. But it does leave me all lined up now with Doom Scythe, command barge, annihilation barge and a full complement of destroyers, although one is now on 1 wound, to open fire and take out these 2 dreadnoughts. That's a lot of fire, that's a lot of -1s, -2s and D3 damage across the board, all being fired in. There goes the Venerable straight away, and our warriors piling their Gauss weapons into that final standard dreadnought. The Lord on foot is right near them, so they're on +1 to hit as well. That's going to help them get as many shots in from rapid and from regular range as well. And the dreadnought starts piling on the wounds. And it was down to the Doom Scythe to do the job, and the Doom Scythe opening up with his Tesla and its Death Ray eventually causes enough wounds on the poor little dreadnought, taking him down and removing him from play, giving me the D3 points that I needed for clearing out the centre of the board from 6 and then from 12 inches. So all that's left on the Grey Knight side then are those 2 little characters, all nice and lonely in that bottom left hand corner of the board. So move into the final turn then. So the Grey Knights turn 6. Time to play Cowardly Custard and hide in the cover, and see what he can do from there. And that was pretty much his entire turn. Really was just spinning back there. He did decide, could he gate to the back there just to cause me a bit of inconvenience, but then remembered that he didn't have that particular item on that one character. He needed it on his Grandmaster, and that Brotherhood guide just didn't have that ability, so we put him back. So for the Necron's final turn then, it's just a case of shifting forward, see if we can get into range and see if we can take out these final 2 characters, and making sure that I can always play the objective and try and get in as many objective points, because if I ever do try and play competitively, you need to remember you've got to play the objective at all times. So the Warriors have all just shifted up, making sure they've got that objective over there in superior numbers, and then it was a case of open fire and try and take out these final 2 characters. And kind of as expected, sheer volume of fire. Eventually, I mean, they've got 5 wounds and 6 wounds, I think, between them, or is it 4 and 5? I can't quite remember. Sheer weight of fire, though, an awful lot of guns coming at them from annihilation barges, destroyers, night scythes, all firing into those guys, and eventually just the sheer weight of fire and those -1s and -2s and D3 damage from the destroyers. And there we go. That was the final dice roll of the game, and all that was left now was a shake of the hands. So there we go. That is the end of my first ever 8th edition game. Bunch of stuff to try and remember to try and learn for next time, but bear in mind this was the first game, so plenty of lessons learned. One of the big ones for us there was remembering the morale phase for those 10 warriors on the left hand side of the game. Could have made a big difference to that Storm Raven, but then there was more uses for the command points than just a dice reroll, so I could have used them to keep them in combat and force them to pass morale automatically. Scarabs are not infantry, so remembering they don't get +1 to hit in combat. The command barge only affects 1 chosen unit. How many times did I read that and not see that? Leadership 10 is amazing, really good for keeping stuff in the fight. And 8th edition is far cleaner and smoother than 7th edition. So finally, I'd like to thank JP for busting my 8th cherry. We are definitely on for a rematch where we can take some of those lessons learned and watch this space as we go forward. And the less said about Grey Knights losing, the better. So hope you enjoyed that 8th edition battle report and the way that it's sort of been formatted, trying to improve that each and every turn, each and every time we try and play this game. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed, and I shall catch you on the next video.